I'm 28 years old, and I am dragging my cast through the mud on the shoulder of County Road 44. It's raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaks through my jacket, but I don't stop. I can't. My 2-year-old son, Lucas, is heavy against my chest, his face buried in my neck, shielding himself from the wind. Every step sends a spike of agony up my fractured ankle, a white-hot reminder that I am not supposed to be walking on this yet. But the alternative was staying in that house. Headlights cut through the gloom, blinding me. Tires screech on the wet asphalt. A black truck slams into park right in front of me. My father jumps out. He doesn't run to hug me. He doesn't ask if I'm hurt. He stands there, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, looking at the empty stretch of road behind me with the eyes of a man who spent 30 years hunting fugitives. "Megan," he barks over the sound of the engine. "Where is your vehicle?" I look him in the eye, shivering, and finally say it out loud. Patricia took it. She said I can't drive on painkillers anyway. Before I tell you what my dad did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The heater in my dad's truck blasted against my face, drying the rain on my skin but doing absolutely nothing for the cold knot in my stomach. Lucas had fallen asleep instantly in his car seat, lulled by the vibration of the engine, his small hand still clutching the fabric of my coat. I stared at the dashboard, watching the digital clock flick numbers away, trying to stop my hands from shaking. The adrenaline was fading, and in its place was a heavy, suffocating shame. "How long?" my father asked. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the wet road, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He wasn't asking as a dad. He was asking as a federal marshal interviewing a witness. 6 weeks, I whispered. "Since the surgery." He took a sharp breath through his nose. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because it didn't look like abuse, Dad." That's the trick. I needed him to understand. I needed to explain why a smart woman, a freelance editor who managed contracts for a living, had let herself be turned into a prisoner in her own home. It didn't start with a lock on the door or a raised fist. It started with a fruit basket. It started with my mother-in-law, Patricia, showing up the day after I had a titanium plate screwed into my ankle. She said, "You look exhausted, Megan. Let me take the night shift with Lucas." And I was exhausted, so I let her. Then it was my husband, Kyle, saying, "Babe, why stress about the grocery run? Mom can do it, you just rest that leg." And I was in pain, so I thanked him. I looked out the window at the passing trees, watching the world blur into gray streaks. It wasn't a boiling frog situation. It was a velvet vice. That's what they did. They didn't hit me. They just slowly, methodically removed the tools I needed to function. The vice tightened one turn at a time. First, Patricia moved into the guest suite to help. Then, my crutches went missing. When I asked where they were, Patricia smiled that tight, patient smile of hers and said, "Oh, honey. Those rubber tips were scratching the hardwood floors. I put them in the garage. If you need to move, just call me. It's safer if you stay on the couch anyway." It sounded like care. It felt like containment. Then, the keys. Last week, I tried to hop to the car, to just sit in it, to get away from her constant commentary on my parenting. My keys were gone. Kyle told me he took them for my own safety. He said, "You're on pain management medication, Megan. You aren't legally allowed to drive. I'm protecting you." I looked at my father. "They didn't break my legs, Dad. They just hid the crutches and told me I was too clumsy to be trusted with them. It's called caretaking, until you realize it's actually prison keeping." That was the dynamic. Patricia was the architect, sketching out the blueprints of my confinement, and Kyle was the weak contractor just following orders. He was terrified of her. Every time I complained, he'd shrink, looking at his mother for cues before telling me I was being ungrateful. They made me feel like my brain was as broken as my bone. "They cut the internet yesterday," I said, my voice flat. Patricia said the storm knocked it out, but I saw the router lights were off. "They didn't want me emailing you. They wanted me isolated." My father pulled the truck onto the gravel shoulder and put it in park. The sudden lack of motion was jarring. He turned to me, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger at me. It was the cold, lethal focus of a man who had spent 30 years tracking people who hurt others for sport. "That isn't a marriage," he said, his voice low and terrifyingly steady. "That is a siege. They isolated you. They disarmed you. And then they took you hostage. We're going back." Panic flared in my chest, hot and bright. "No, Dad, please, I can't face her. I just want to go to your house." "We aren't going back to talk," he said, shifting the truck back into gear. "We are going back to collect evidence." The tires crunched on the gravel driveway of the lake house, a sound that used to signal home but now sounded like a cage closing. My father's truck looked absurdly out of place next to the sleek, modern lines of the house, a rugged tool of enforcement parked next to a glass and wood monument to pretension. Dad killed the engine, but neither of us moved. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminated like a stage, I saw them. Patricia was lounging on the white sectional with a glass of red wine. Kyle was in the gaming chair in the corner, headset on, oblivious to the fact that his wife and child had been missing in a storm for 2 hours. "Stay here," my father said. I ignored him. I unbuckled the car seat with trembling fingers and pulled Lucas into my arms. I wasn't staying behind. I walked up the slate path behind my father, matching his stride, using his broad back as a shield against the panic rising in my throat. Patricia spotted us first. Her smile didn't drop, it just froze, brittle and sharp. "Oh, look who's back," she called out, her voice projecting through the glass before we even opened the door, and she brought reinforcements. "Hank, you're just in time for a drink." My father walked through the front door, his boots heavy on the polished concrete floors. He didn't look at the wine, he looked at Kyle, who was scrambling to pull off his headset. "Where are her keys?" my father asked. His voice was the low rumble he used right before he put cuffs on someone. The one that made the air leave the room. Kyle stood up, smoothing his t-shirt, trying to find some dominance he didn't possess. "Hank, let's not be dramatic. We were worried about her. She's been unstable. We took the keys for her own safety. You know how recovery makes people foggy. The casual dismissal, the practiced concern. It made my blood boil, hot and sudden. I stepped out from behind my father. "I'm not unstable, Kyle. I'm leaving." Patricia scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "Leaving? Where are you going to go, Megan? You can't drive. You don't have a job. You can barely walk to the bathroom without help. We are protecting you. We are keeping this family together because you are clearly incapable of doing it yourself." My father stepped between us. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He just pulled a small notepad from his breast pocket and clicked a pen. "You aren't protecting her," he said, writing something down. "You are withholding personal property. You are restricting movement. And if you try to stop her from leaving with her child, that is unlawful imprisonment under federal statute. I'm logging the time and your statements now." Kyle blinked, the color draining from his face. "You can't arrest us. This is a private home." "I'm not arresting you yet," my father said, not looking up from the pad. "I'm building the case file." He turned to me, ignoring their sputtered protests. He put a hand on my shoulder, heavy and grounding. "Megan, look at me." I looked up, my eyes swimming with tears. "You aren't crazy," he said, his voice cutting through the fog Patricia had spent 6 weeks building around my mind. "You're just outnumbered. There is a difference." The validation hit me harder than the rain had. I wasn't broken. I was just fighting a war on 2 fronts without any allies. Until now. "Go upstairs," my father said, turning back to face them. "Get your documents. Get the baby's things. I'll handle the guards." I dragged myself up the stairs, my bad ankle screaming with every step. The physical pain was a grounding force, a reminder that I was still in a body that could feel, that could move, despite their best efforts to convince me otherwise. Patricia was shouting something downstairs about grandparents' rights and trespassing, but my father's voice, calm and impenetrable, walled off her noise. I reached the landing and headed straight for the home office. I needed Lucas's birth certificate and my passport. I wasn't just leaving for the night, I was leaving for good. The office door was closed. I pushed it open and froze. The room was a mess. Piles of paper covering the desk where Kyle usually kept his pristine gaming setup. but it was the open file cabinet that caught my eye. Specifically, the drawer Patricia had labeled, Private Business. "Don't touch my filing," she'd snapped at me just last week, when I'd gone in looking for a stamp. "You wouldn't understand the tax implications anyway." I limped over to it. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From rage. I pulled the folder labeled M. Carter. My name. Why did my mother-in-law have a file on me? I opened it, and the first document made the air leave my lungs. It was a bill of sale. For my Toyota RAV4. Dated 3 days ago. Sold to Lakeside Auto for $28,000. "They took my keys for my safety," I whispered to the empty room. "No. They took my keys because they had already sold the car out from under me." I flipped the page. Credit card statements. Not mine, Kyle's, but the charges were staggering. $5,000 to a law firm in the city, $3,000 to a debt consolidation service. I dug deeper, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There was another document, thicker than the rest, a loan agreement. I stared at the numbers, trying to make them make sense. It was a home equity line of credit. For $95,000. But this house wasn't ours to leverage. It was in my name. It was the inheritance my mother had left me when she died of cancer 3 years ago. Kyle wasn't on the deed. Patricia certainly wasn't. I looked at the signature line at the bottom of the page. Megan Carter. The handwriting was loopier than mine, a clumsy imitation. But there it was. A signature I hadn't made, authorizing a loan I hadn't asked for, against the only thing my mother had been able to leave me. Oh my God, I breathed. They hadn't just trapped me. They were liquidating me. I grabbed the entire file, clutching it to my chest like a shield. I grabbed Lucas's documents from the safe, miraculously unlocked, and turned to leave. My ankle throbbed, a dull, heavy ache, but I barely felt it. The pain in my leg was nothing compared to the clarity in my mind. I wasn't just a victim of bad in-laws. I was the victim of a felony. I limped back to the stairs, the folder burning against my skin. I could hear them downstairs. Patricia was laughing now. A high, nervous sound. "Hank, really, you're being ridiculous. We can settle this like family." "I don't settle with suspects, Patricia," my father said. I started down the stairs. Every step was a judgment. Every step brought me closer to the moment where I would burn their world down. My father was standing by the fireplace, his arms crossed, watching Patricia pace. She stopped when she saw me coming down the stairs, her eyes narrowing at the file in my hands. "What do you think you're doing with that?" she snapped. "That is private family business." "You're right," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "It is business." I reached the bottom of the stairs and threw the file onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy slap, papers fanning out across the polished wood. The forged loan agreement lay right on top, my fake signature staring up at us. "You took out a $95,000 home equity line of credit on my mother's house," I said. "And you sold my car for $28,000. Kyle went pale. He looked at his mother, panic flaring in his eyes. "Megan, wait, we can explain. It was an investment. We were going to pay it back before you even noticed." "An investment?" I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "I saw the credit card statements, Kyle. The law firm? The debt consolidation? You weren't investing. You were paying off Patricia's gambling debts." Patricia gasped. "How dare you? I have never." "Save it," my father cut in. He picked up the loan document, scanning it with a practiced eye. "This is wire fraud. Identity theft. Elder financial abuse, depending on how we frame the manipulation." He looked up at them. "And since you use the internet to process the loan, it's a federal crime." He turned to me. "It's called financial infidelity, Megan. It's when abusers secretly spend money, take out loans, or sell assets to control their partner or cover their own tracks. But the worst part? They usually turn off the notifications on your banking apps so you don't see the credit score drop. It's digital theft." I pulled out my phone. My banking app. I checked the settings. Notifications. Off. "You didn't just trap me," I said, looking at Kyle. "You were erasing me. You were going to leave me with nothing but debt and a bad leg." Patricia's face crumpled. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, desperate fear. We were going to fix it. Kyle's investment is about to hit big. We just needed a bridge loan. You used my dead mother's house as a bridge loan, I spat. Megan, please, Kyle begged, stepping toward me. Don't do this. We're family. No, I said. Family doesn't forge signatures. Criminals do. My father handed the file back to me. It's your call, Megan. I looked at them. The woman who had criticized my oatmeal while stealing my inheritance. The husband who had taken my keys while selling my car. They looked small now, pathetic. I pulled a single sheet of paper from the back of the file, a blank fraud affidavit my father had printed out before we left his house. He really did think of everything. I held it out to them. You have 24 hours to vacate my house, I said. And I mean everything. Your clothes, your computers, your wine collection. If you aren't gone by sunset tomorrow. I sign this affidavit and hand the entire file to the district attorney. You wouldn't, Patricia whispered. I'm Lucas's grandmother. And I'm his mother, I said. And I am done letting you rob him to pay for your mistakes. They stood there, paralyzed by the sudden, crushing weight of consequences. My father opened the front door, letting the cool night air flood the stifling room. Clock starts now, he said. The sun hits the floorboards of my new apartment at 7 a.m. It's a small place. A second-floor walk-up in the city. Miles away from the isolation of the lake house. It doesn't have floor-to-ceiling windows or a chef's kitchen. It has a radiator that clanks and a view of a brick wall. But it has something the estate never had. It has a deadbolt that only I have the key to. I stand at the counter making coffee. I flex my left ankle, rotating it in slow circles. There is a stiffness there, a phantom memory of the fracture, but the sharp, blinding pain is gone. I am walking without a limp for the first time in months. I am walking on my own terms. There is a knock at the door. I don't jump. I don't panic. I know who it is. My father walks in, carrying a bakery box. He looks less like a federal agent today, and more like a grandfather. He sets the box down, and pours himself a mug of coffee. Black. The district attorney called this morning, he says, his voice quiet over the steam of the cup. And? Patricia was indicted yesterday. Multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse regarding the manipulation of the trust documents. She's looking at 5 to 10 years, mandatory minimums. I take a sip of my coffee. It tastes bitter and clean. And Kyle? Bankruptcy court, Dad says. Without Patricia's liquidity, he couldn't cover the credit cards. He's back in a rental. His credit score is lower than the temperature outside. I should feel pity. I should feel sad that the father of my child is ruined. But I don't. I feel the cool, detached satisfaction of a ledger finally being balanced. They treated people like assets to be liquidated. Now, they are the ones being sold off for parts. Dad stays for an hour, playing blocks with Lucas on the rug. When he leaves, hugging me tight, the apartment settles back into a comfortable silence. I pick up my phone. I scroll past the messages from my lawyer, past the emails about my new editing contract. I stop on a single app icon hidden in a folder I used to be too afraid to open. Family Locator. The app Kyle installed to make sure I was safe. The digital leash they used to track my movement from the bedroom to the kitchen, ensuring I never stepped out of line. I stare at the little blue dot pulsing on the map. It shows me exactly where I am. Not a prisoner, not a patient, just a woman standing in her own kitchen. I press my thumb down on the icon. It shakes, as if afraid of what's coming. I tap the X. Delete app? Yes, I whisper. The icon vanishes. The last tether snaps. I wasn't grateful for the cage anymore. And looking back, I realized the most dangerous part wasn't the lock on the door. It was the lie that they were holding the key for my own good. If you are watching this, and you feel like you are walking on eggshells in your own home, if someone tells you that you are too weak, too sick, or too anxious to manage your own life, if they take your keys for your safety, or check your receipts for the budget, listen to me. That isn't love. That is a siege. And you don't have to wait for a rescue party. You can walk out the door. even if you have to limp. Even if it's raining, just walk.